And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be talking about Isaiah Thomas and his opinions on Steph Curry. Now, recently on the Draymond Green podcast, he said that Steph Curry should not be a top point guard of all time. He should not be in the discussion for being a top point guard. He believes that the Golden State Warriors superstar Steph Curry isn't a true point guard. Zeke feels that Curry's style of play doesn't mimic what a traditional point guard does, which is why he thinks it's Draymond who plays point for the Warriors. Now, here's the quote. Let me just tell you what I think. Well, I'm going to say it in his words. Let me just tell you what I think about point guards. On the Golden State Warriors, you are the point guard. You have more assists than Steph Curry. You bring the ball up. You initiate the offense. You set the defense. You run the show. Steph comes off the screens. He catches and he shoots. And obviously, we know Isaiah. If you guys don't know who Isaiah Thomas is, Isaiah Thomas was a former point guard for the Detroit Pistons, and he was infamously the leader of the Bad Boy Pistons. They ended up winning back-to-back championships in the early, in the 1980s, in the late 80s, 1988, 1989, and obviously, winning 2 championships and being a point guard himself, he does have some credibility in talking basketball. However, I do not think I think he's very, very biased. Now, Zeke, he has a history of really talking down on a lot of the current players in today's league, and he also has a tendency of trying to bolster his resume and trying to sort of boost his I don't want to say his ego, but he does have a tendency of trying to make himself look better or sound better by putting down other players. Now, obviously he doesn't do that all the time, so I'm not really accusing him of doing that 24/7. However, this is a good example of that, because him saying that Steph Curry is not a point guard, to me, is absolutely blasphemous, because he's saying he's not a point guard just because he doesn't bring the ball up. We're acting like Steph can't bring the ball up if he doesn't want to. It's just the coach, Steve Kerr, is so smart as a coach. He knows that Steph Curry could bring much more value to the team than to just bring the ball up. And he also knows that Draymond Green can also bring much more value to the Golden State Warriors if he's bringing the ball up as well. It's not like Steph can't handle being a point guard and can't handle the ball in his hands 24/7. Obviously he knows how to do that. It's just he doesn't, because the team gets a lot more out of him running around screens, shooting that three-pointer, because he can do that. And regardless, he can create the shot himself if he wants to. However, it's a lot easier to create a shot off a screen than it is coming off of an isolation, because isolation is probably the most difficult offense to run in basketball, because you have no help from anyone else. It is just you. You got to be the bucket getter. You got to make the play. And let's not act like Isaiah Thomas was making the play 24/7 every single time. He wasn't even a Finals MVP in 1989. Joe Dumars was a Finals MVP. And, it just... Maybe I'm just a little bit, biased against Zeke, because I do not like Isaiah Thomas. I'm not a big fan of Isaiah Thomas because of, his ridiculous opinions on 80s basketball, 90s basketball, and current NBA players, because he talks as if he doesn't know really know how this game is played now, and he doesn't like how the game is played now, and it's sort of he insults some of these players, saying that Steph Curry isn't a point guard simply because he doesn't consider him as a top point guard and he shouldn't be in that conversation is blasphemous. Because you want to know what I think it is? You want to know who else played point guard? Isaiah Thomas. So if you have Steph Curry as a point guard, that means you probably have him over Isaiah Thomas. So if you change the narrative like, oh, he's not really a point guard, get him out of the conversation, that leaves room for Isaiah Thomas to be in that conversation. And I don't agree with that whatsoever. He didn't explicitly say this, but it does feel like it's implied. Now, at least that's my take on it. And because he's the shortest player on the court. Now, that's point guard. 9 out of 10 times, that is point guard, and they fall under point guard. And just because he doesn't bring the ball up doesn't mean anything. Is Kyrie not a point guard because he doesn't bring the ball up when he was playing with LeBron James? That's not what the box score said. The box score said he was a point guard. He was matched up against Steph Curry, who was also a point guard. So, and it becomes a little bit more, I will give him this. It does become a little bit more difficult in deciding who is like the true point guard of a team because of how positionless the NBA has become now. And I really don't think that positionless basketball should really like affect much on positions. I mean, we know that Steph Curry is a point guard. It is clear cut because we've seen what he can do with the ball in his hands. We've seen that he can make the plays. It's just he chooses not to, and the coach chooses to not let him do that because he can do so much more. And like it's part of his strengths, and the coach just decides this is because let's face it, guarding a 3-on-3 is much more difficult than guarding a 1-on-1. And we're not going to act like Steph Curry can't run the plays himself. He doesn't need to do that if he has a bunch of players to set him screens, because it's a lot easier for him to score off of the catch and shoot because of how good of a shooter he is. So that shouldn't really be taken into account. And just because Draymond handles the ball and like he brings the ball up and like tends to run the offense a lot because of his playmaking, that doesn't mean that he is the point guard. That like he's a ball handler, he's a floor general, yes. Point guard? No. He is not a point guard. And part of that has to do with his height. I mean, voice crack, good lord. 6'7", 6'8". Draymond Green is not a point guard. He is a power forward. If anything, he is a point forward. He has everything that you need in a playmaker. And yes, Draymond is a playmaker for that team, but saying that he's the point guard is like, it feels like it's diminishing what Curry does on the court, because we've seen Curry handle the ball himself. We've seen him run the offense himself when Draymond Green is out, when other players are out. We've seen him do all these things. Just because he comes off a screen and shoots the ball does not mean he's not a point guard. Paul Pierce actually said this same thing, and I don't know why these like old players, they have the same take. Like these old players that try to boost their resume, they have this same take, trying to take down other players. It's like, it doesn't make any sense to me, because Paul Pierce, he once said, Steph Curry is a wing guy. He is a wing. And I'm like, what the heck is a wing player? What is that? Just because, like, yes, he stays on the wing because he could shoot from out there. Like, what is a wing player? What is that? What is that? I don't know what that is. But, like, they just, it's common. They just make things up to try to hinder every single one of the players. And I know Paul Pierce does this because he is still bitter about losing to LeBron and LeBron being his father. He is still bitter about that. And I'm not surprised that, and Zeke is still bitter about a lot of things. He's bitter about how he did not shake Jordan's hands. He's bitter about how he wasn't selected for Team USA because Jordan didn't want him there. He's bitter about how he's not even in a conversation for being one of the best point guards in the league because Curry is here. And he always, it's odd. I just don't understand why a bunch of these old heads and a bunch of these like old players, they don't appreciate how the game has evolved, and they don't acknowledge like these new players up and coming. I don't understand it. Shaq, he acknowledges Steph Curry to the T. He gives him all of his flowers, and that's an example of someone who knows his ball and who knows, like, obviously, like, there are I will say Shaq does have some takes on some centers that aren't really all that. However, he does have some very good takes on centers. Like, a question was brought up, like, what do you think you would do if you were in the league right now? And he said, I'm already in the league. Look at Giannis. And that is ridiculous levels of respect. And it makes total sense because Giannis is dominant. So was Shaq. It only makes sense. Like, those takes make sense. Saying that Steph Curry is not a point guard just because the plays are run around him running screens, no, that is not ideal. That's just the offense that they run. That's the brilliant mind of Steve Kerr at work. But that is just my personal opinion because it's difficult to guard a 3-on-3. It's much more difficult to guard a 3-on-3 and communicate rather than it is to guard a 1-on-1 where you just have to try and stay in front of the defender. But with that, we are out of time for this segment, and that is the end of the show. Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. Please remember to use the link in the description or the link that is displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Helps the show, makes the show much more interactive. And once again, that's the end of the show. Thank you guys once again for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.